the Akron Community Foundation.
Akron Community Foundation, excuse me. Maybe if they have metrics that they use when it comes to equity and inclusion, if we can hear those. Because again, if this is what we're driving as far as programs, we need to have some starting point to understand what we're talking about. Because, I mean, our definition, and then the other thing is this. One last thing, when we talked about groups that are doing the work, but don't have the technology, the average age of the Greater West Akron Council of Block Clubs leadership is probably in its 70s. Okay, they've been doing the work for over 12, I don't know how many years. How many years? They've been doing the work for a while, providing paint programs for seniors. Are we working with them to get them funding so they can do that program throughout the summer? Because I don't see them here. And I know they would not have had the, I know they wouldn't have had the skill set to go online and do it.
Traditionally, they were not funded through neighborhood partnership programs, so it's another funding source through housing rehab.
That's NPP.
Yeah, but just one thing to close on that. I can only speak right now for integrated development, but part of what we did, right, when we created this department, we have a definition for equity and we have metrics. So if those were in the presentation that I gave, but I'm happy to make a copy and put it in the mailboxes. I will do that for council members, but we are tracking, at least from an economic and planning development perspective, how we are operationalizing equity. And I will put that in everyone's mailbox again.
Thank you. All those in favor of referring this item signify by saying aye. Aye. The ayes have it. Item number 9, urging the Summit County Land Bank and/or city administration to license use of unwanted lots to the Leapfrog Reading Charity in order to facilitate the building of free library parks. Mr. Neal, you're the sponsor. Did you want to make a comment about this?
This is a piece that came in right before we went on recess, and at that time, we heard the history of those associated with Leapfrog trying to build the neighborhood park libraries, everything from contacting the land bank, not having success, going through that process, trying to work through the city, so they asked to purchase, then they went to donate. There was some concern with donating. What I thought was a good idea that came from, I believe Mr. Hardy, was about licensing, which is what I understand we do with our community gardens. So this piece comes back saying that we license the lots, and although this is dealing with Leapfrog, it would set a precedent with other groups that want to work with vacant lots throughout the neighborhood by providing some type of community value on the lots.
Okay, very good. Further questions or comments? Okay. Hearing none, is there a recommendation on this item from anyone? Yeah. Questions or comments? Recommendation?
May I ask a question?
Ms. Samovian.
Help me understand why this is in planning, because I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, that's a good question. Everything pursuant to our charter, whenever it comes to leasing land, selling land, anything whatsoever pursuant to our charter has got to come through the Planning Committee of Akron City Council.
Well, I certainly move that we do this. I can only tell you that we're talking about allowing these folks to work with the land bank that we give land to. Is that what we're talking about?
This right here would be with the lots that the city owns. But I mean, if we coordinate, we could coordinate it with, with the land bank. I noticed that one of the support pieces that Mr. Angeloni had worked on, which was the actual licensing agreement, isn't in our packet. But if people have questions in regards to the licensing agreement, what the city is proposing is that the same thing that we use for folks who do community gardens, the same licensing agreement that they use would be used under these conditions.
I'm willing for us to explore this.
Yeah, so thank you. The thing of it is that for me personally, I have we have well over 20 of these throughout the city. To say we could use more, sure. All these organizations, though, that have brought these forward didn't require legislation from the city council. They found ways to work with the service director's office in order to get them constructed and built on city lands. They found ways, had the the wherewithal, if you will, to work with, you see them on public lands and private lands as well. And so these folks are able to work through everything and get it done. And for me personally, a resolution urging, I would just recommend that this organization go and meet with the service director's office, and I think we said that 8 weeks ago, whenever this first came in, to meet with the land bank and everyone else. That should be their charge, and that's the way they should operate, as opposed to just us like urging them to do this. Me personally, that's what I believe, that we have libraries all over town. We have well over 20 of these things in various neighborhoods. I've seen them in residential, commercial, next to coffee shops, in the middle of a neighborhood, a residential area. Absolutely, we can always see more of these, but I would recommend they just work within the system. I don't think we need a resolution urging the city to work with them. Obviously, the city has worked with them, with organizations in the past, because they're out there. We have them in parks, we have them in areas like this. So I see no need for a resolution, to be honest with you, and I'm going to vote against this. So with that, Ms. Amovian, did you make a recommendation, Mr. Chairman?
I just have another question, trying to make sure I understand. If the sponsors would advise the owners of this program to identify lots that they would like to use or purchase, or what are they talking about being donated by the city, is that correct?
No.
Or just use?
Mr. Neal, go ahead.
As was discussed during our last, when we brought this up before we went on recess, I believe Councilwoman Samples at that time spoke of a lot that they had went to the land bank to acquire. They were going to purchase it. They went through all the different steps, and they were given, it was said that some development was going to take place on that land. And I don't want to speak for Ms. Samples. When she comes back in, she can speak for herself. But she said couple years later, or 2 or 3 years later, that lot is an eyesore in her community. So they've gone through the process. I mean, come on, we all read the article, or if you haven't read the article, we've heard statements on this floor about, the feelings of folks here about Mr. Tarl. I mean, we've heard those things, and unfortunately, the politics and things come into play. Here's an opportunity to provide value-added enrichment in our communities by a group that, I mean, hey, they've been running the Leapfrog program for years. They haven't come to us for any money for that program. They've been running that program for years. And I know some people have mentioned about the back taxes and whatnot, and I'm not for anything, us giving anybody anything on that, but again, let's keep things in perspective. If you read the article, it talked about if they acquire the property that they bid on, which is the school, Goodrich School, if they get that, then they'll have more code violations added. Well, when you buy distressed properties, they come with code violations. So
stick to legislation,
I am sticking to the legislation, Mr. Chairman. I mean, these things have been coming up. So if we stick to the legislation, to your point, why is a resolution needed? We have businesses coming here asking for buildings to be given to them that come through a resolution. There are folks in business every day that go out and do the traditional conventional loans and acquire and buy buildings. But we have people that come here asking us to give them buildings. We have folks who have acquired city property and are making money off of it that has come through here. So here we have someone that is willing to take a burden off of the city's books by maintaining property and providing an asset enrichment in the community. I don't see, and since we only operate through ordinances and resolutions as a council, that's the only way we can be engaged in this. This is why this is coming, because every other mode and method to be able to bring these into the community has been stalled.
Okay, thank you. There's been a number of organizations, as I mentioned before, who has in fact worked and found ways to get this accomplished, this goal of providing more books in the community. And my mind was made up 8 weeks ago. Mr. Hardy, did you have something you wanted to add?
I just want to say again that for me, I stand by what I said the last time. Council certainly is within its right and power to urge the administration to do any number of things. But I want to also be on the record that this isn't about somebody who inherited code violations. And it's not political, for me at least, when you have an individual who refused to give another human being heat in a property that they owned, even after the point where we had to go criminally after them and still didn't do it. That to me is not somebody whom I trust to be in the best interest of our youth or anyone else in the community. Further, when we talk about taking burdens off the city, I'd be happy to show any council member who wishes to see how many properties have become foreclosed or torn down at our expense based on his neglect. Further, I again caution, like I did 8 weeks ago, how we're talking about this particular company in the legislation when there is a sitting city council member who advocated, in a huge conflict of interest in my opinion, for the donation of city land to something that he owns or co-owns or is a business partner of. So for all types of reasons, I just wanted to be on the record that regardless of how council decides to vote on this particular piece of legislation, I find it very hard to see a pathway for the city to partner in a land use capacity with someone who has a track record of that nature.
Thank you. Is there a recommendation for an adverse report?
I would like to recommend an adverse report.
Is there a second? All those in favor of the adverse report signify by saying aye. Aye. Against?
Nay.
Roll call, Mr. Keith.
Roll call, Fesco.
Aye.
Amobian.
I'm opposed to the adverse report.
You voting no?
No.
Is that correct? No?
Yes. Yes.
Famer?
No, adverse, right?
Neil? Swirsky?
Yes for the adverse report.
Okay, thank you. We'll report that out this evening. That's all that come before the Plan Committee. We're adjourned. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, that's, you heard my request to make a statement. I don't know why we go through this. No, something needs to be put on the record. This is the childish behavior.